To join us on set is Robert Geist Pinfold, who's a lecturer in peace and security at Durham University. Welcome to Al Jazeera, Robert. So how do you assess Israel's intentions here, given the degree to which that they have assaulted all the military positions within Syria? What's their game plan?
Well, I think for Israel, this is a case of something old, something new. We've seen Israel do this before. They've done this countless times before. Israel feels insecure, whether that's true or not. And as a response to that insecurity, what do? They take territory. We've seen that happen in Lebanon. We've seen that happen in Gaza. And now we're seeing that happen in Syria. Obviously, the irony here is that what we have in Syria is Israel basically creating a buffer zone to protect its original buffer zone, which is the Golan Heights. That was the original strategic logic of occupying the Golan Heights. What we're seeing here that's new is not necessarily territorial control and occupation, but actually Israel's unprecedented number of airstrikes. We know that over the past year, Israel did attack Syria, but launched around 200 airstrikes on Syria. In the last few days, we've seen around 480, possibly even more. And I think that this really shows that Israel is now changing its regional role. And Netanyahu speaks of a strategic upheaval in the Middle East. Israel used to be a status quo power, and that was what we used to criticise it for, and rightly so, for basically not doing enough to move towards a negotiation with the Palestinians, for example, to change the regional status quo for the better. Now Israel is the revisionist power. It's Israel that wants to change things. It's Israel that wants to roll back Hamas and Hezbollah and the Syrian regime, and that's what they're doing today. So it's kind of a new strategic phase of Israeli behaviour.
And given that backdrop to this very complicated situation, how capable is this interim government of bringing all the disparate vested interests together to make a viable, stable government?
Well, the jury is very much out on this. Yes, it was HDS, Golani's forces, that captured Damascus, but HDS is actually quite a small organisation. Yes, it's done an effective job of governing Idlib, but they might have as few as 20,000 fighters. You know, that's going to be a big job, not just policing Syria, but also kind of creating a new legitimate government and basically working on things like post-war rehabilitation and bringing the nation together. The question is, can they do that ideologically and can they do that practically? We're hearing them say the right things. But the fact that the US is not going after them, even though there's a $10 million bounty on Jelani's head, suggests that the US are willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. But at the same time, we're not seeing any moves towards reconciliation or delisting HDS as a terrorist organisation yet. So I think the West is very much saying, we'll see what happens before making any strategic changes in our policies.
Of course, the goal here is a united Syria, isn't it? It's very early days, but 5 days or so in after Assad's fallen. What's your sense of how likely or not that is?
Well, it depends with whom you speak. Most organisations will say we want a united Syria, but when you ask them what that united Syria would look like, they will give you very, very different answers. Are we talking about, for example, a federal Syria that sees larger degrees of autonomy for regions like the Kurdish region in the east, or possibly the Alawite majority region in the west? Are we talking about a strong centrally governed Syria like we had under the Assad regime? Are we talking about a secular Syria, a liberal democratic Syria? I think at the moment we're still very much in that euphoric phase. Assad is gone. We should not be shedding any tears for the demise of this very brutal dictator who killed 60,000 people. But once the dust settles, then it's going to get a lot more complicated. The real fight is ahead of the Syrian people for deciding exactly what a future Syria would look like geographically and politically, and indeed who should govern it.
Right, and then you have to factor in the millions and millions of refugees that there are right around the world, in neighbouring countries and elsewhere, across Europe and elsewhere. And how important is it for them to be part of that process?
Oh, I think it's absolutely critical. But then there's all sorts of factors at play here with the refugees. You know, I remember during the Iraq War, we saw similar scenes like we're seeing at the moment in Syria, of all these refugee swarms of refugees coming back home and being very jubilant and excited to go back to their old towns and villages and to see their family again. But we all know that went very wrong very quickly, simply because, again, that creates so much pressure on a government in Syria that we don't know its power and its abilities and its capabilities. So you're going to have to feed these people, house them, provide them with sanitation, safety, and all those kind of things that people need to get by. And if they don't have that, that's when bitterness and resistance starts to ferment. So I actually think the refugee return will make things harder for HDS in the short term, at least.
There is also so much anger and resentment and deep emotion engendered by the years and years of Assad repression and this demand for retribution. There's a potential threat there that it could overwhelm this project of restoration and restoring stability?
I think this is the really interesting story to see where this goes. And we're seeing now this kind of pressure that Jilani is facing internally and externally. He wants to be saying the right things to the West and to other regional actors like Turkey, showing that, he's not interested in retribution or vengeance. He wants to be a reasonable, responsible statesman. However, I know it's been overwrought, but HTS is of course a splinter group of ISIS and of al-Qaeda. The question is, how much control does Jilani have over his members? How much does his changes, how much are they reflected in the membership as well? These are people who have fought and died for a free Syria and HTS, but also other organisations too. The question is whether they'll be able to put aside their grievances, many of which are rightful grievances, towards previous members and personnel in the Assad regime and get on with building a new Syria, and how much will they want to look back and settle score?
Right, so many factors and strands that have to come together in these complicated days, weeks and months ahead. Robert, thanks for that. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.